Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are the ultimate intellectual shortcut, taking dense, complex source material and, well, distilling it down into the wisdom you can actually use.
And today we are wrestling with a concept that, on the surface, it sounds completely out of step with how we think today.
Right. Live like a king.
Exactly. That title immediately conjures these images of, inherited wealth, opulence, maybe a bit of entitlement.
A gilded cage, yeah. But the source material we have today, it just completely flips that entire script.
Mhm.
We're looking at chapter 11 from a really fascinating, expansive book called The Legend Mind by SKR or Sonu Kumar.
And this book it's ambitious. It's not just psychology or philosophy. The author uses what he calls an interdisciplinary approach.
He's pulling from everywhere. Science, math, religion, physics,
Mhm.
all of it driven by his own, as he puts it, curious questions. It's like he's trying to build a unified theory for the self.
So our mission today is to shortcut right into the core of what he means by live like a king. We are breaking down what SKR calls a powerful metaphor for cultivating an inner sovereignty.
Inner sovereignty.
And the source is totally explicit here. This is not about the crown on your head or the money in your bank. If you're coming to this chapter for financial advice, you're going to be pretty disappointed.
It's all about the quality of the rule within your mind. And the definition SKR gives is the key. The king here is a figure of nobility, responsibility, discipline, and excellence.
And this chapter is placed very deliberately. It's in Unit 1, which is called 10 Shades of the Legend. The author apparently studied 10 different figures, a kid, a monk, a politician, even a model, to synthesize the skills you need to lead your own life.
The idea being you can master different professions in a single lifetime. It's a huge ambition.
It sets the philosophical stakes incredibly high, and you see that right from the start. The dedication is to the Lord Shiva, and then there's this repeating acronym for legend.
Legacy, even, God, and not demons.
That tells you everything. This is not just self-help. This is high-stakes, spiritual, almost mythological self-mastery. The idea that pursuing excellence is this legendary, maybe even divine quest.
Okay, so we had our mission. We have the context. The whole idea pivots on this concept of inner sovereignty. It's the foundation you have to build inside before you do anything else. So for our deep dive today, we thought we'd try to capture this in a kind of movie style, right?
I like that. Imagine the king's journey as a series of scenes, character-defining moments.
Exactly. So let's start inside that mental throne room and unpack the architecture of this mindset.
Let's do it. We're starting with Section 1, the royal mindset, or internal sovereignty. This is the bedrock. SKR says it has to reflect dignity, clarity, and strength. And there are 3 pillars that hold it all up.
The first pillar, this is the absolute bedrock of self-governance, self-respect, and confidence. And the text hits you immediately with a critical distinction. It says, a king doesn't seek validation because he already understands his intrinsic value.
And that is such a powerful starting point. He's drawing a line in the sand between, let's say, borrowed validation and inherent worth.
What's the difference there?
Well, validation is fleeting, right? It's a dopamine hit from a social media, a compliment someone gives you. It comes from the outside. Intrinsic worth, though, that's permanent. It's unconditional. SKR calls it a quiet certainty.
A quiet certainty. I like that. It's the opposite of that loud, brittle arrogance you sometimes see.
Exactly. And the power of that quiet certainty is just immense. I think of it like the constitution of your internal kingdom. The source is clear. You are not defined by what other people think. You're not defined by your past failures or any temporary setbacks. You are inherently worthy.
And if you truly deeply accept that premise, it changes your entire operating system, doesn't it?
Completely.
Yeah.
Because if a subject in your kingdom, let's say it's a harsh critic or a competitor, tries to undermine you, the sovereign doesn't crumble. They don't fall apart. They recognize that all that external noise, it can't get through the internal walls of their own worth.
It's a really radical form of self-reliance. When you lack that quiet certainty, you become desperate for external assurance.
You do. You start seeking out conflict, you people please, you chase status symbols that, they lose their shine almost immediately. The king, though, is internally validated. All that energy other people spend seeking approval, the king just redirects it toward building his legacy.
And this quiet certainty, it must feed directly into that foundation of self-acceptance and self-love. The text actually equates self-love with resilience.
It does. It advises you to treat yourself with the same compassion you'd offer a close, trusted friend. I mean, think about high performers. What often separates them from everyone else is their recovery time after a failure.
Right.
If you fail and then you spend weeks just berating yourself, beating yourself up internally, you've basically just compounded the damage. SKR is saying you need to treat your inner self like an injured soldier. They need triage and healing and re-equipping, not execution.
You respond with compassion. You ask, okay, what did I learn from that tactical mistake?
Exactly. So self-love here isn't some passive, fluffy emotion. It's the active, pragmatic engine of resilience. It's what lets you bounce back fast.
But hold on, let's push back on this a bit. If we're talking about radical self-worth, why use the figure of a king? I mean, historically, kings are all about inherited power, entitlement. Isn't SKR risking confusion here? Or is he deliberately subverting the metaphor?
That is a fantastic challenge, and the author totally anticipates it. He immediately gives us the counterbalance, avoiding arrogance.
Okay.
True confidence, the text reminds us, is inherently humble. A wise king knows that every person has something to teach him. So the title king is subverted. It's not about inherited leisure. It's about demanding the highest possible form of accountability and learning.
So the arrogance of that old school king, the one who thinks he's just naturally superior, that's precisely what the Legend Mind King rejects.
Totally. The king we're talking about here is a perpetual student. If you meet someone you think is beneath you, and you believe you have nothing to learn from them, you've just built a wall. You've blocked off vital intelligence from your kingdom.
A truly secure mind sees every interaction as a potential data point.
And that recognition, that respect for others, it links back to their own sovereign journey. The text is really clear on this. By recognizing other people as sovereign beings on their own journey, you actually reinforce your own sovereignty.
So humility isn't weakness.
No, it's strategic. It's the recognition that knowledge is infinite and the realm of wisdom is way, way bigger than your own little borders. It's a self-sustaining loop of mutual dignity.
Okay, so that's the foundation of self-regard. Let's move to the active regulation of the self. Pillar number 2, composure and presence. The argument here is elegant and simple. Calmness is strength, especially when chaos hits.
The king has to be the ultimate emotional strategist, and the text is explicit. It says emotional reactivity, and especially anger, often masks insecurity or fear.
So let's use our movie analogy here. Imagine the scene. The enemy has launched a surprise attack. Or maybe the royal treasury is almost empty. What does the subject do?
The subject panics. They shout. They demand scapegoats.
Right. But the sovereign remains centered. Their power doesn't come from the volume of their voice. It comes from the stillness of their response.
They practice restraint. They know that one impulsive decision, one choice driven by fear or ego could cost the entire kingdom. So they listen more than they speak. They observe the chaos before they commit a single resource. That's stillness. That's their tactical advantage.
And this composure, it leads right into the king's communication style, an economy of speech. A king, it says, speaks only when it adds value.
And this isn't silence because you're shy or you can't decide. It's a chosen silence. It's a strategic pause that you use to convey authority and thoughtfulness.
I mean, how many times have we all seen people argue just for the sake of arguing, just to hear themselves talk?
All the time. But SKR tackles this head on. The king doesn't argue to win. He argues to clarify or uplift. And that one line, for me, that's transformational.
It forces you to completely redefine what winning even means in a sovereign's court.
Right. If the argument doesn't advance the mission or clarify the vision or somehow uplift the conversation, it's just a waste of the king's breath. It's a waste of his time.
So silence itself becomes a form of power projection. When the king finally does speak, after all that observing and listening, every single word carries more weight.
It's like that old saying, only fire the cannon when the target is critical. The subject just fires indiscriminately. The sovereign conserves their ammunition for maximum impact.
And this internal strength, it's really tested, I think, in this area of dignity and adversity. The text says that challenges don't diminish a king, they reveal his character. This is the big scene in the movie, right? The scene where the king loses everything, the battle, the crown, maybe a loved one.
And the required response in the face of that loss or criticism or uncertainty has to be grace. Not defensiveness, not despair.
Grace.
Grace means you accept the reality of the loss, but you don't let the loss redefine your internal identity. You remember that intrinsic worth we talked about? So if a competitor steals a big client, or the press writes a critical article, the subject lashes out, they get bitter.
But the sovereign reframes it. The loss becomes a data point about a security vulnerability or maybe a mistake in strategy. They maintain their composure and they start planning the recovery.
They do not allow the external storm to dictate their internal weather. That's the key.
Okay, so this brings us to the third pillar of the royal mindset: vision and purpose. Inner sovereignty is great, but it's not enough if it's aimless. A well-composed boat that's just drifting is still drifting.
Exactly. A king has to dedicate himself to a noble goal, a cause that's greater than himself. And this is the philosophical antidote to just chasing fleeting pleasures.
The like of a subject, as he describes it, seems to be defined by these temporary fixes: the rush of an impulse buy, the distraction of entertainment, the immediate gratification of comfort.
And those things only give you a temporary rush. But a noble goal building, a legacy, serving your community, mastering a craft that provides meaning. It provides the long-term momentum that can sustain a king through the really difficult times.
This feels like it ties back to that deeper, almost spiritual tone of the source material.
Yeah.
If your kingdom's mission is purely self-serving or shallow, the minute you face massive resistance, your motivation just collapses.
But if the goal is truly greater than yourself, then your ethic of service compels you to keep moving forward.
Vision alone, though,
Mm.
that can just be daydreaming.
Sure.
And this is where I think SKR's philosophy does something brilliant. It bridges the big philosophical ideas with hardcore practical advice. He insists on execution through SMART goals.
Right. The high-level idealist also has to be the granular pragmatist.
So you have to break down that big, noble purpose into goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This is how you turn an abstract mission into a concrete, executable military campaign.
And the text insists, track progress like a strategist.
That tracking element is so important. A general doesn't just give a vague order like, go win the war.
No, they measure everything. Resource consumption, troop movements, they analyze measurable victories. So if your noble goal is mastering a complex craft, your SMART objectives might be, 10 hours of focused practice every week, or complete the beta version of the product by Q3.
But let me ask you this, isn't there a tension here? If you focus too much on the measurable and achievable parts of SMART goals, do you risk letting the metric overshadow the noble purpose? Does the king just become a slave to his own spreadsheet?
That's a great point, and a wise king never loses sight of the R relevance. The strategist has to constantly be asking, does this particular measurement or objective still serve the foundational virtue and the noble goal?
So if the metric starts driving unethical behavior,
You scrap it. Or if it compromises the long-term vision for some short-term gain, it has to go. The SMART framework is there to serve the king's virtue and vision. It's never the other way around.
and that leads perfectly into the core governing laws of this kingdom. Lead with virtue. The text calls them the crown jewels of character: integrity, justice, courage, and compassion. And these are the non-negotiable filters for every single decision.
And the true test of integrity is always the path of inconvenience, isn't it? A king doesn't take the easy road if it compromises his honesty or fairness. He knows that sacrificing virtue, even just once, weakens the entire foundation of his kingdom.
So integrity is what you do when no one is watching.
It's the internal audit that must always, always pass. And the others follow from that. Justice means fair assessments. Courage means acting despite fear, and we'll come back to that one. And compassion means seeing the humanity in every single interaction. These aren't just aspirations. They're the active governing laws that ensure the kingdom's long-term moral stability.
Okay, so the royal mindset is now established. We're transitioning now into section 2. The ruler's domain. This is the shift from knowing who you are to showing who you are through your actions.
I like that. If Section I was the internal constitution, Section 2 is the map, the treasury, and the standing army. The core principle here is that a king acts with authority over his life and influences others through example.
And this transition is so important because sovereignty isn't tested in meditation. It's tested in action. Self-mastery has to be demonstrated through radical ownership and purposeful engagement with the world.
The first, and maybe the most liberating declaration of that sovereignty, is ownership. SKR makes this profound statement: your life is your kingdom. And if that's true, then you are the ultimate sole authority.
And here's the brutal but necessary distinction he makes. Blaming others, circumstances, or bad luck is, and this is a direct quote, the language of subjects, not sovereigns.
That hits so hard because blaming is a total surrender of your agency.
It is.
The moment you blame an external force, your upbringing, the economy, a competitor, you're basically declaring that you are powerless. You're just a victim reacting to forces outside of your control. The subject lives in the past tense of grievance.
Whereas the sovereign, no matter how difficult the circumstances, they own the outcome.
They own it all. If the economy crashes, the king owns the responsibility to adapt the strategy. If a venture fails, he owns the failure, which means he also owns the lesson and the path to the next success. This radical responsibility. That's the ultimate form of personal power.
And this ownership has to be applied to our most finite resource time. This is where the king practices, let's call it, priorities with purpose. Not all tasks are created equal. The sovereign have to be ruthless about focusing only on what moves the needle or aligns with that noble vision.
And to manage this, the text gives a really practical administrative tool, the Eisenhower matrix. Urgent versus important. This is the strategic governance of the king's day. It's how you ensure your resources are deployed wisely.
We should probably break this down because it's such a crucial tool for turning mindset into action.
Absolutely. So imagine 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is urgent and important. These are your crises, your immediate demands. Quadrant 3 is urgent but not important. These are distractions, interruptions, other people's emergencies that they try to make yours.
And quadrant 4 is not urgent and not important. Your time wasters, leisure that isn't actually restorative.
Now here's the difference between the subject and the sovereign. The subject spends their entire life bouncing between quadrants 1 and 3. They're constantly reacting to crises and interruptions. They're always busy, but they're never actually progressing on their noble goals. They're basically professional firefighters.
But the sovereign, they ruthlessly delegate or just eliminate everything in quadrants 3 and 4. They strategically manage quadrant 1, and the majority of their time, their best energy is spent in quadrant 2.
The quadrant of not urgent but important. This is where the real work happens. This is planning, relationship building, proactive health investments, deep work, strategic reflection.
This is where the legacy is built.
Exactly. Governing your time wisely means you have to ruthlessly defend the space you need for that important, non-urgent work. Because if you don't, all of those tasks will eventually migrate over to quadrant 1 and become urgent crises that just overwhelm the kingdom. The king is proactive. He minimizes crises through strategic planning.
Finally, every king, no matter how composed he is, faces fear. So the text teaches us to confront fear strategically. The goal isn't to eliminate fear. That's biologically impossible.
It's to acknowledge it and assess it. Growth, as SKR reminds us, lies beyond comfort.
Fear is really just an internal signal that there's risk present. A mature king doesn't ignore that signal.
No, he acknowledges the emotion, he assesses the risk with that clarity we talked about from section 1, and then he acts anyway. That is the literal definition of courage. Action in the presence of fear.
And the text frames these calculated risks like starting a business or speaking up in a really difficult situation or changing careers. It frames them not as acts of bravado, but as strategic deployments of resources.
They are investments in your future self. They're aimed at expanding the border of your kingdom, even if that border feels uncomfortable for a while. If the reward, the noble goal, is worth the risk, the fear, then the sovereign moves forward. Deliberately.
Okay, so sovereignty is a state of perpetual evolution. That brings us to continuous improvement, which the author links directly to having a growth mindset. A stagnant kingdom is a vulnerable kingdom.
And the king is explicitly defined as a perpetual student. Lifelong learning is just non-negotiable. He reads widely, he reflects constantly, he seeks out mentors, and he stays deeply, deeply curious. Knowledge is framed as both power and responsibility.
That responsibility part is key, isn't it?
It's everything. Knowledge isn't just for your personal gain or to show off. It's a tool that has to be wielded wisely for the good of the kingdom, whether that's your family, your team, or your craft. If you acquire wisdom, you have a sovereign responsibility to act on it, to share it, or to use it to mitigate threats.
A king who has knowledge, but allows his people to suffer from his own inaction. He's failing his most basic duty.
And this commitment to learning means the king has to view adversity as a curriculum. And this is where the philosophy takes a really dramatic, almost beautiful turn. SKR analyzes what he calls struggle as school.
Every obstacle, every setback, is just a lesson disguised as a tragedy.
Let's really break down the examples he gives, using our movie-style narrative. Imagine a scene where the king faces a massive business failure. That failure isn't the end of the movie. It's just the most expensive, most detailed consultant report he is ever going to receive.
Right. Failure reveals your blind spots. It highlights all the assumptions or weaknesses you didn't even know you had back in the planning stage.
Or think about rejection. If the king's proposal gets rejected, that rejection teaches resilience. It forces him to shore up his inner defenses and refine his approach. It tests that intrinsic value we talked about earlier. It's basically the universe saying, your strategy was insufficient. Try again.
And he even mentions betrayal, which is the deepest wound.
Even betrayal. It doesn't just hurt. It teaches discernment. It sharpens your ability to choose loyal allies. It forces a profound, if painful, understanding of human nature and vulnerability. So the king's essential question is never, why me? That's the language of the subject.
The sovereign asks.
What is this here to teach me? What specific weakness did this struggle just reveal in my kingdom's defenses?
In that reframing, it transforms defeat into curriculum. You're never fundamentally defeated, you're just enrolled in a much more difficult class.
Exactly. And if struggle is the school, then the king has to be really wary of comfort. The source explicitly declares, comfort is the enemy of growth. If you're not occasionally and deliberately uncomfortable, you are not expanding your borders. You're not preparing your kingdom for the next storm, which is always coming.
So the sovereign actively seeks out discomfort. SKR gives specific examples. Public speaking, learning a radically new skill, emotional vulnerability.
These are all areas where the king chooses to be exposed, where he risks failure, or where he has to process these difficult, unprocessed emotions. The king embraces these discomforts because he understands they are necessary forms of expansion. They are how the kingdom gets stronger.
So the final aspect of the ruler's domain is how the king interacts with the people he influences. This is the nurturing of the kingdom. A king has to influence, but he does so through service, not coercion.
The text really stresses this. A true king doesn't rule for his own personal glorification. He rules to uplift his family, his team, his community. Leadership is a responsibility based on service.
You lead by showing the way, by being the example, and by ensuring the welfare of your people, not by demanding blind submission or just relying on the power of your title.
And that kind of leadership requires a huge degree of maturity, especially when it comes to conflicting viewpoints. The king has to embrace tolerance and acceptance. He has to understand that every single person in his kingdom is at a different stage of their journey, fighting their own internal wars.
That raises a really important question for self-mastery, though. If the king holds himself to such an incredibly high standard of discipline, how does he avoid judging people who don't?
The answer is empathy, not judgment. You recognize that diversity of thought and background is strategically valuable. It strengthens the realm. It provides different perspectives and insights that the king on his own might miss. A king who only surrounds himself with yes men is ruling a brittle, unintelligent kingdom.
And the ultimate expression of this secure leadership, it links all the way back to that idea of intrinsic worth. It's universal respect. The mandate is clear. The king must treat everyone, and the quote is, from the janitor to the CEO, with genuine dignity.
And kindness is explicitly defined here. It is not weakness. It is the mark of secure leadership.
That's a powerful scene to imagine in our movie, isn't it? The insecure leader who relies on his title to demand respect. He uses passive aggression or condescension to enforce his authority.
But the sovereign, because he's already secured his internal worth back in Section 1, he can afford to extend genuine, universal dignity to everyone he meets. That kindness isn't a favor he's bestowing. It's an unwavering demonstration of his own secure internal status.
Okay, we've moved from mindset to action. Now we move to Section 3, the King's Temple. We've established the invincible mind and the strategic actions. Now we focus on the physical vessel and the immediate environment.
And these are presented not as resources to just be used up, but as sacred spaces that must be honored and maintained. This is the ultimate practical expression of inner sovereignty. It's the philosophy made physical.
Right. SKR recognizes that without a stable, resilient physical platform, all those high ideals, the noble goals, the complex strategies, they just collapse under the weight of fatigue or illness.
The king has to maintain his vehicle or the entire kingdom suffers.
So the first rule of the temple is health as non-negotiable. SKR is blunt here. A king cannot lead if he's weak, fatigued, or mentally foggy. Leadership demands clarity and sustained energy, and weak habits just erode that very quickly.
Which is why sleep, nutrition, movement, and mental hygiene are not treated as optional conveniences. They're not luxuries you enjoy if you have time. He describes them as rituals.
Rituals.
A ritual implies intention, importance, regularity. They are the essential daily rights of self-governance. A king wouldn't skip the defense strategy session before a critical battle, right? And in the same way, he doesn't skip the rituals that ensure his peak physical and mental performance.
And this leads to the requirement of a daily physical investment. And I love how exercise is reframed here. It isn't a punishment for what you ate, it's a celebration of what your body can do.
That is such a profound mental shift. Instead of focusing on the pain or the chore of it, you focus on the capability, the strength, the endurance, the flexibility. So whether it's weightlifting or yoga or just a walk in nature, the physical activity is honoring the physical vessel as a masterpiece of design. It's an active response for the temple.
And the text includes this fascinating detail: the importance of a daily new creative activity.
Yeah, that suggests the physical investment has to also engage the mind and body in new ways. It's about preventing stagnation, constantly testing the boundaries of your physical and cognitive agility. A king must never be predictable, not even to his own muscles.
Next, the king has to master nourishment. The text encourages the mindfulness of preparing your own meals.
Which ensures quality and gives you control over your fuel input. And crucially, the sovereign eats to fuel his mission, not to numb emotions.
That's a powerful separation. Food is a strategic asset for the noble cause. It's not an escape mechanism or a way to self-medicate your emotional distress. So when the king feels anxiety or exhaustion, he doesn't reach for comfort food. He addresses the source of the distress, or he seeks out a restorative ritual.
And the king's allies in nourishment are very straightforward, very disciplined. Hydration, whole foods, and moderation. Simple rules of governance over the internal system that maximize your energy and clarity.
Okay, finally, we have to address an element that might sound superficial at first, but SKR grounds it really deeply in philosophy. Pride in appearance, or as he puts it, dressing like a model. My first reaction was, wait, I thought this wasn't about materialism.
And it's not. The appearance is meant to convey respect for yourself and for others. The text links how you dress and groom yourself to a declaration of your self-regard. You don't need luxury, but you need clean, well-fitting attire that projects a sense of care and competence. If you respect your kingdom, you present its ruler accordingly.
So what's the philosophical connection?
The statement is that dressing like a model shows your inner attitude as reflection or mirror to whole earth. Your appearance becomes this nonverbal declaration of your internal state of excellence. If you treat your temple with dignity through mindful dress and grooming, it projects that inner attitude outwards. It sets a standard for how others see you, and maybe more importantly, how you see your own readiness to lead.
A sovereign doesn't just manage his body, he manages his court, his immediate associations, his inner voice. The second pillar of the king's temple is the positive environment, and it starts with a really difficult task: pruning the court or cutting toxic ties.
And this is where that commitment to inner sovereignty meets the messiness of real human relationships. It brings up that hard question: what happens when those toxic ties are, immediate family members or lifelong friends? This is where the rubber really meets the road on protecting your inner peace.
The text is direct. It advises to distance yourself with grace from people who consistently drain your energy, spread negativity, or undermine your growth. And the core insight is so profound: loyalty should not cost you your peace.
A sovereign recognizes that protecting the mental and emotional boundaries of the kingdom is a non-negotiable duty, even if it means stepping back from a historical or a familial obligation that is actively hurting you.
Pruning with grace. That means setting clear, respectful boundaries. No malice, no public drama.
Exactly. You maintain dignity for both of you, but you ensure that negative influence cannot get through the kingdom's walls. It's an act of sovereign self-preservation. You're ensuring the resources of the king's temple aren't perpetually drained by someone else's instability.
And at the same time you're pruning, the king has to actively surround himself with excellence. The environment just profoundly shapes your mindset.
You have to seek out people who are disciplined, who are kind, who are ambitious in their own right. The people around you set the thermostat for your own ambition and your character.
It's strategic association.
Totally. If your goal is mastery, you have to be around masters, even if that means getting out of your comfort zone to find them. Your peer group should challenge you. It shouldn't just coddle your weaknesses. When you associate with people who embody discipline, it just naturally raises your own standard for execution and character.
And finally, the king has to govern his innermost domain by rewriting the inner narrative. This is active, conscious mental discipline. You replace that negative, limiting self-talk with empowering beliefs.
This is the ultimate act of self-command. The king has to become the watchful, discerning censor of his own thoughts. You have to catch that negative thought, that subject's voice saying, I can't do this, and you deliberately, consciously replace it with the sovereign's declaration, I am learning, or this is my opportunity.
The text is completely unambiguous on this point. It says, your beliefs create your reality. Choose empowering ones. If the king believes his kingdom is doomed or that he's unworthy, he will govern from that position of scarcity and fear.
But if he believes his kingdom is resilient and capable of growth and inherently worthy, he acts from that position of strength. And he makes that belief system a self-fulfilling prophecy of success.
And that brings us to the final major section, Section 4, the king's legacy. This moves us beyond the mechanics of daily actions and towards a more timeless wisdom, a broader perspective.
True royalty, in SKR's view, isn't measured by what you accumulate. It's measured by the lasting positive impact you leave behind and the wisdom you embody.
Legacy is the horizon of the legend mind. It's about transcending temporary concerns and focusing ruthlessly on what is permanent.
And paradoxically, focusing on your future legacy requires an absolute non-negotiable mastery of the present moment. And this starts with gratitude as a daily practice. A king, the text says, doesn't wait for more to be happy.
Gratitude anchors the king in abundance. It's a strategic shield against that perpetual modern anxiety of not enough. If you can find genuine joy in the simple blessings, a warm meal, a loyal friend, a quiet morning for reflection, you reduce the urgency of chasing external validation or future wealth.
You realize you are already rich in the things that truly matter. If the king is constantly just chasing the next victory, the next asset, he's eternally delaying his own happiness. Gratitude lets him govern his kingdom today, drawing strength from his current resources instead of projecting anxiety onto tomorrow's unknown shortages.
This mastery of the present also requires the king to release the illusion of control. A wise king plans diligently. He uses his strategist mindset, his SMART goals, but he accepts uncertainty with equanimity.
The external world is chaotic. It always will be. Markets shift, pandemics strike, political tides turn. The subject tries desperately to control these external storms, and it leads to this crippling anxiety. The sovereign accepts the reality of uncertainty. He focuses solely on his response, not on the storm itself.
Let's imagine a massive global crisis, a scenario where the king loses 50% of his financial reserves overnight. The subject panics. He makes rash, desperate moves.
But the sovereign accepts the loss as an external reality. He immediately pivots to focus on the elements he can control. His team, his strategy, his personal composure, his physical health, and he starts planning the next move. That acceptance is inner freedom because all his energy is focused on agency, not on worry.
And the hallmark of a true legacy builder is the ability to transcend materialism, status, money, fame. The text classifies these as fleeting.
They're temporary external rewards. They can vanish overnight with a change in fortune, so the king builds what outlives him: character, relationships, and contributions.
Which brings us to the litmus test for every major investment of your time or energy. It's so simple, but it's profound. Will this matter in 10 years?
If the answer is no, if the decision only serves to boost your ego or provide some short-term profit, it is likely a distraction from the permanent work of building a legacy. This test forces the king to make decisions based on enduring virtue, from Section 1, rather than immediate convenience.
So if a big project compromises your integrity, even if it promises a massive payday, the 10-year test fails.
It fails because the erosion of your character is permanent.
And finally, the ultimate measure of royalty is how you lead by example. Your legacy isn't just written in your achievements, the buildings you built, the money you made. It's written in how other people feel in your presence and how they grow because of you.
The goal isn't just to be successful yourself. It's to be the catalyst for success in others. The ultimate contribution is creating a ripple effect of sovereignty. The goal, as the text really emphasizes, is to be the person that others point to and say, because of them, I became better.
That is a permanent contribution. It ensures the king's spirit of excellence continues to govern long after he's gone.
Wow. That was an immensely detailed exploration into this philosophy.
It really was. And the synthesis of the entire chapter, I think, is undeniable. The crown of the legend mind isn't some distinction you get through birthright. It is a daily practice of choosing nobility over ego, responsibility over blame, and growth over comfort.
It requires this relentless, proactive discipline. You're constantly pushing against the tide of comfort and reactivity. But, as the author says, this discipline grants you something far more valuable than external power or inherited wealth. It grants you inner freedom.
You don't need a physical throne because the crown is earned every single time you choose the sovereign response over the subject's reaction.
And the chapter boils it all down into 4 specific, high-stakes behavioral choices for earning that crown. 4 daily declarations of sovereignty that govern the internal kingdom.
Number 1, choose integrity over convenience.
That's the test of character when nobody is watching.
Number 2, speak with kindness instead of reactivity.
The test of composure when you feel threatened or provoked.
3, invest in your health when no one is watching.
The daily ritual of self-respect in the King's Temple.
And 4, lift others as you climb.
The commitment to service and the true foundation of your legacy.
These are the governing laws of the Legend Minds Kingdom. They're simple to understand, but, profoundly difficult to uphold consistently, which is why mastery is a legendary pursuit.
And SKR brings it all home with this powerful concluding statement. The greatest kingdom you will ever rule is by yourself. That is the highest form of royalty.
And the text ties this back to your attitude being the most important factor. It stresses that the king has royalty in his blood, and they show the world by their own work for their great followers.
And then this entire internal operating system for self-mastery is connected back to the book's overarching high-stakes theme with one last esoteric flourish, this unique acronym that defines the ultimate state of mastery, KING.
We should probably analyze this final ambition because it really elevates the whole endeavor.
It does. So K is for Nero Edelyu, the constant state of learning and mastery.
I is for internationally. The idea that your influence and your excellence should transcend all boundaries, professional, social, geographical.
N is for No Edelyu, the constant evolution and growth, rejecting stagnation. Remember, comfort is the enemy.
And G is for God.
And this connects the pursuit of self-mastery all the way back to that dedication to Shiva. It suggests that perfecting the self is the ultimate legendary pursuit. You reach a state of such high discipline and influence that it's almost divine in its creative power.
So the full ambition is declared right there at the end, King. The king who known internationally by the name as New God in a Mega Universe. That is a complete philosophical framework designed to transcend the human condition through relentless self-mastery.
So if we accept the premise that our attitude is most important for leading our kingdom, here's our provocative thought for you to carry forward. And let's focus specifically on the pragmatism of Section 3, the King's Temple. The body and the environment are the non-negotiable foundations.
What is one concrete habit from the King's Temple, be it sleep, exercise, nourishment, or your environment, that you currently treat as optional, but that you will now treat as a non-negotiable, sacred ritual of self-governance, regardless of your external circumstances?
What element of your kingdom is currently running dangerously low on resources that only the sovereign, that only you can replenish?
Choose one investment. Choose one ritual. That single disciplined choice is the first and highest act of a sovereign.
That is your challenge, learner.
That was the deep dive. We'll see you next time.